I just want to reiterate again what we're about, why we do all the stuff that we do, why we gather together. This idea of simple church, these are the things we aspire to. We get this from the end of Acts 2, from kind of 42 on to the end of the chapters. It describes what the church looked like when it first happened. And there are three things that we kind of aspire to. We want to be a church that shares. We share ourselves, we share our time, we share our stuff with each other and with the community. And remembering that that is our calling. That is outreach. That is what we're to do. We're to make sure that we are looking out, and this is important these days, looking out for somebody else more than ourselves. Not so worried that I've got mine, that I don't worry about you getting yours. The early church did this kind of a crazy thing, right? They all sold their stuff, so they had this pot of money to take care of other people that were in need, to make sure nobody was in need. And then they went around and ate meals. They shared meals at each other's houses. And there was kind of this example, and I want us to be a part of that. Some of you have already done your summer supper in September. Ours isn't till the end of September that we're doing, which is tragic. But so it's fall, autumn supper. But the point is we want to begin to practically live that out, that we hold loosely to our stuff. We hold loosely, to be honest, to our rights. We hold loosely to what is mine and see it as ours. Not only for this little family, which again, we want to care for our little family, but we see that for our community, the people around us, our neighbors, our friends, even people who aren't quite grateful enough for it yet, or maybe who are in their spot because of something stupid they did. You know what? So are we. So we want to be a church that shares. We also want to be a church that is in awe of God, that we worship hard. Not just like this. This is fantastic. This is an emotion. Music helps us make an emotional connection, and that's wonderful. But that we're in awe of God because we're close to Jesus. When we are close to Jesus, when we have a relationship with Jesus, we cannot help but be in awe of him. He's so much better than us, right? And we can't help but have perspective and go, well, that is fantastic. And see how much he has offered us and how much work and how much he has sacrificed, just as we talked about right now, that we want to be a church that is known for being not necessarily the programs we do or the stuff that we do, but that we're known because we're in awe of God. And then we want to be a group that grows, that the church grew in numbers, like more people became part of the church, thousands at a time, sometimes one at a time. So we want to be that. I think we got room to grow. We got room to expand and put a few more chairs in here. Not just on Sunday morning, but during the week and as we have different stuff that we're doing together. I love that. But also that we grow personally. We grow closer to Jesus. That we grow as people. And that never stops, whether we're 18 or whether we're 80. We need to continue to grow as people and grow toward Jesus. We've been doing this series, this lunch with Jesus, this idea of times that Jesus had lunch, ate with some friends. And we've talked about this because meals are this intimate yet casual time. There's something normal and something human about it. And Jesus was friendly and relational and personal and human and common and special in his meals. And it revealed his humanity and it revealed his deity at the same time when he ate. And so we've talked about, as we've gone through, right? I mean, we started with the big lunch, the feeding of the 5,000, that Jesus took a couple of fish and a couple of loaves and he fed all of the people. Fed them all. Pretty cool. And he allowed the disciples to be a part of that. That not only did he do this miracle, again, talk about showing his humanity and his deity, he realized people were hungry and needed to have actual food as well as spiritual food. And I love that. So he provided, he's like, yeah, they need lunch. Let's give them lunch. And I'm also going to show you that I'm God and I can make lunch out of nothing at all. Isn't that a song? No. And there is... the second was fixing the feast, the idea that Jesus loves to bring joy. He cares about normal lives. Water to wine. And then he gave some examples. He was invited to a banquet, and he helped give some examples like, hey, be a humble person. Don't take the highest. Don't seek the best seat, right? Take the lower one and be advanced up to there. And if you're the host of the banquet, invite the lowly. Invite the marginalized. Care not just for the people who can make you look better and make your party better, but invite the people who have nothing that they can give back. And then we talked about more than a meal, the idea of Martha and Mary. I loved this deal, that Martha and Mary were the typical family members, typical siblings, that Martha was worried about making a great meal. She invited Jesus and the disciples to come eat. And they came in to eat, and how bad would it have been if Martha invited Jesus to come to lunch and then didn't provide lunch? So somebody had to make the lunch. Jesus had already done the loaves and fishes. You can't count on that every time. right? And so Martha's in there cooking and preparing this meal, and she's getting frustrated because her sister is out just sitting, listening to Jesus. Just hanging out with the men, sitting at Jesus' feet, learning. And she comes out and finally is like, Jesus, don't you see this? Come and make her help me. And kind of she was right. She kind of should have helped, right? According to our life and the way we think about it. And yet, Jesus goes, no. Martha, you're worried about all this other stuff. What's more important? Learning and living with Jesus. The meal was not everything. So when we talk about sharing a meal with somebody, the meal's important, sure, but hospitality is way more than putting a great meal and showing off your cool house. Hospitality is sharing our lives with people as we share our gruel, right? As we share our food. And then last week, my favorite part in this series is unsavory. Jesus saying, look, he ate with unsavory people. He ate with people who were rough, and he loved it. He sought them out. They sought him out. He sought them out. That was his favorite people. And he's like, when people criticized him for it, he's like, yeah, sick people need a doctor, not well people. I just love that fact that he's like, yeah, not that I don't like well people, but they don't need time with me as much. And then he did say even the well people, though, are pretty sick. People who think they're righteous ain't so righteous. But at least the unsavory people know they need me. That needs to be our mission. We're on the same mission. We need to have the same values and the same loves that Jesus had, and seek the unsavory. I'm going to scoot some of this over because I'm going to sit down a little bit, so you know you're in trouble. I'm going to do more leaning. So this week we want to talk about the title is The Last Breakfast, but of course that comes from the idea of the Last Supper. And our theme verse, I don't know if I didn't probably put it on the screen, but I just want us to maybe lock this in. If we ever wonder what's the filter, what would Jesus do? Remember this verse, Luke 7:34. The Son of Man, on the other hand, feasts and drinks, and you say he's a glutton and a drunkard and a friend of tax collectors and other sinners. I dig that concept, that description of Jesus. Man, how many times if someone asked us, why do you follow Jesus? I think I might start saying this, because Jesus loved sinners. Jesus loved tax collectors. Jesus loved traitors. That's who he hung out with. That's who he sought. That's what he loved. Maybe we should be kind of the same people. So today we celebrated communion. In my church growing up, we called it communion. Sometimes you may call it the Lord's Supper. But it's a memory, it's a reminder of the Last Supper. So our first point is the Last Supper. And we're looking here in a passage, we're going to look at Luke 22. And it's based on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or the Passover. And so some of this, I couldn't fit everything on your half sheet, so I'm going to read some verses around it. You know, you can also go home and read it in your own Bible. Did you know that? So if you ever get frustrated with the ... parts sometimes where I put that on to get it on the half sheet, bring your own Bible. You can read the whole thing along and get the whole picture. Starts in verse 7. Now the festival unleavened bread arrived when the Passover lamb is sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John and said, go prepare the Passover meal so we can eat it together. And they went off into the city and they found and Jesus had given them instructions. He said, like, there's going to be a guy walking with a water pot, which would have been kind of weird because usually women were walking with the water pot. So it's like, there's going to be a guy with a water pot. This is such a Jesus thing to do. Follow him and say, the master wants to eat at your house. And the guy's going to say, sure. And I love the disciples by now we're kind of like, yeah, we get it. So they find the guy, they follow him. Hey, we want to eat at your house. And he said, sure, it's all ready for him. How does that, anyway, those are the little mini miracles Jesus does that we kind of overlook. So anyway, they go and they went into the city and they found everything just as Jesus has said. And they prepared the Passover meal there. And the time came, Jesus and the apostles sat down together at the table. Right, so he comes in. And then Jesus says, I have been very eager to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. For I tell you now that I won't eat this meal again until its meaning is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And then he took the cup of wine and he gave thanks to God for it. Then he said, take this and share it among yourselves. This is what we just did. Take this and share it among yourselves. For I will not drink wine again until the kingdom of God has come. And then he took some bread and he gave thanks for it and he broke it into pieces and he gave it to the disciples saying, this is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And after supper, he took another cup of wine. He said, this cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as sacrifice for you. Then it goes on to verse 25 and says, and Jesus told them, in this world the kings and great men lord it over their people, but yet they are called friends of the people. Politicians, right? Then 26, he says, but among you it will be different. Those who are the greatest among you should take the lowest rank, and the leader should be like the servant. Who is more important, the one who sits at the table or the one who serves? The one who sits at the table, of course, but not here. For I am among you as one who serves. So much here. There's a whole chunk of sermons, and I promise you I'm not going to cover it all today. I'm going to save a little something for the next few months. But today we want to talk about this. So the explanation of this, the Passover is this specific ritualistic feast to remember God's deliverance of the Jews from Egypt. Remember that? You've seen the movie, right? Charlton Heston leads them out, right? But this is the part where there's all the plagues and the angel of death comes and they are passed over by putting the blood on the door frame, and those who were willing to obey, those who were willing to follow, the faithful were spared. And this is a memory of that, which you would want to memorialize that. And this meal that they eat is a very specific meal that they would eat to remember that time. And we do it today, even again. I didn't read the passage this morning. Usually I read this passage from the New Testament, the epistles, where Paul is instructing the new church. Like, this is one of the things you should do. Do the Lord's Supper, and when you do it, here's kind of why we do it. Not just to have a potluck, but we do it so that we can remember and be reverent and remember this time that Jesus gathered his guys when they celebrated the Passover, that was remembering a picture of Jesus to come, the sacrifice of Jesus, the sacrifice of God for his people. But really at this moment, this special one, this is an end of an era dinner. This is kind of like, my kids have been in theater for a long time. Like, Katie started in theater when she was little, and Henry now is studying at college. And after months of rehearsal, the first show, after the first time you put on the show, they kind of do their end of an era dinner. They do opening night dinner. Usually the cast and crew and everyone will go out and terrify an Applebee's somewhere. And they'll have weird makeup on still, right? And I've been to a few of those, and I quit going. I sent Deb to those because theater kids are, after all the pent up, all the hard work, and then they put on the show, there is so much adrenaline going that I could not deal with it, right? And I love those kids, but not then. And so they're at some restaurant, and they are just whooping it up as they do. And usually the adults that have been overseeing it are getting blotto next to them because they're exhausted from the whole time as well. But it's this final end, which I always like, why are they celebrating at the beginning? Like, the show just started, but they're celebrating all the work that they did up to that point. And now they get to live it. It's kind of like that. Or for those of you who had kids in athletics, or maybe, sports banquet. At the end of the season, you give out awards, and you're going to have this banquet to kind of commemorate it. Or maybe it's just that, hey, my son did this. He just moved out of one house and moved into another. And, all the roommates had a dinner together, kind of to mark an end of an era. And Jesus is doing that. This is a specific time. I love that it says Jesus was eager for this meal. I'm not a huge scholar, but I don't think there are any other places that Jesus talks about being excited or eager for something. And maybe it's Greek and something I don't understand it, but that's one of the few times, at least, that Jesus is saying, I'm excited for this to happen. I'm eager for this meal. He was looking forward to it. Or maybe he was just anxious because he knew it was coming, but he was excited for this moment. The Last Supper, Jesus sits with his friends, which, again, I'm sorry, a little tangent. I think Jesus and the disciples are the best community group ever, right? And what did they spend a lot of their time, when we look at it, we're seeing here, Jesus spent a lot of time just eating with them. If you're in one of our community groups, as we relaunch in the fall, we're going to kind of relaunch some of these groups or add some new ones. A huge part of what we do is making sure you eat together. I had one group that I said, okay, you can't eat because they had some severe allergy stuff. So we're like, I'm sorry, you just can't eat. But you got to find something else. So you got to play a game or do something else instead. But there's something about that, right? And that's what this whole series is about. There's something about this. And Jesus ate with them all the time. It's just this fantastic community group that they ate. And they're going to eat this special meal that's a reverent, important meal that has some significance. They're going to eat this together. And he naturally turns it maybe from its original intended purpose to reflect on the past. He turns it into this natural teaching moment about the future. Jesus is always connecting the past to the future. And he calls them to remember this meal. He makes some specific requirements. He says, you need to remember this time that we ate together. They didn't understand what was coming. Jesus knew what was coming. And he says, I want you to remember this meal that we're having together today. And I want you to use it as a memorial, a sacred moment, and a remembrance. So remember this time we're eating. Remember what's important. It's the last time we're going to be together like this. It's the last time that we're going to have community. So it's important to remember that community with friends, it's imperfect and human, and we're just all together. And community with God, he's like, remember that we're going to have community together with Jesus. The connection to God is through Jesus. And remember that there's connection with each other and with God as we remember this meal, as he commanded them to remember. There's something special as we do this. And I love, though, that the most important, most memorable, the thing he commanded them to remember was him. Let that sink in for a second. All the stuff, this is his last shot to teach. This is his last time in this format, his favorite format to teach, sitting around with his 12. His last chance, the last supper. What did he choose to do? He said, remember not all the stuff that I taught you. Remember the scriptures. Remember this instruction. What did he say? No, what I want you to remember is me. I want you to remember my sacrifice. And what did he talk about the sacrifice? What did he say to remember? He said, remember my actual life. He uses his flesh and his blood, the fact that he was really there. That's what I want you to remember. The example of who he was, who he loved, who he cared for, who he healed, and who he ate with. Remember me. And I love that he chose this amazing mnemonic, this amazing little memory trick. I was a teacher for a lot of years. And I was always trying to come up with some little way to remember some song or some rhyme or some acronym or some way to remember the important stuff. You ever do that? You ever make up a little song for something to remember it? Just me? Okay. Thanks. You're not helping. So he comes up with this amazing little mnemonic, amazing little memory trick. Eating and drinking. If there was one thing that we were always going to do, that was going to happen every day, that was going to be consistent and continual and necessary, that you would never be able to forget it. If every time we ate and every time we drank, we stopped to remember Jesus, we would be different people. Right? Every day, it's continual. Remember me every day and my sacrifice every day, he's saying. Something so necessary. Just remember, just to make it through the day. When, what if we took this even a little bit too far? Now, I understand we may say he was saying only at that Passover time. I don't think that was the point. That once a year, remember me. Right? No, every time you eat and drink. What if we took it for real? Like, what if every time we were cranky, instead of having a Snickers, we remembered Jesus? Or maybe have a Snickers and remember Jesus? Would that make us get along with our coworkers and our spouses and our kids, and right? Every time I feel empty, okay, so this is therapy time for Dave. I love this. I get free therapy with you guys. I've struggled with addiction. And praise God, I've been clean, 14, 15 years now from pills. But clearly, I've replaced that with food. I have an unhealthy relationship with food. And I used to joke about it because I figured if I joked about it, then you wouldn't joke about it. I don't want to do that anymore. I'm trying to deal with it. It is hard. I go to recovery group now to talk about food. And it's way harder to deal with food than it was with pills. And pills almost ruined my life. You know what I grab instead of a pill now when I'm feeling empty or bored or sad or happy? A ho-ho. Right? Or a big slab of cheese or something. And, I'll tell the guys in the group, there are times that I am eating I'll be sitting there watching TV and I'll have, I don't even remember making this sandwich. I mean, I do, but you know what I mean? It's just kind of so normal. What if every time I felt an emptiness and a need and a craving and a sadness, instead of turning to something in my control, a peanut butter and jelly or a pill or porn or whatever it is, what if I turned to Jesus? Something so normal. We should make it now, just as it's second nature to eat and drink, it's second nature to turn and remember Jesus and his real, live, real sacrifice of his real flesh, his real blood. The example of us unreasonable love for unsavory people. We'd be in a different place. What if every time we took a sip of coffee or some of our water bottle, if we stayed hydrated with Jesus? So a few little thoughts, kind of random, on the Last Supper, on communion. We can't have communion without community. That's why we do it together. Even if we do it by ourselves, we're doing it together. It's not only to bring us in communion with God, but communion with each other. We should do this again. Let's work on this week. Let's make this our goal this week. That when we sit down, maybe it's only when you sit down to a meal. Let's add the sip of coffee on the way to work. We'll work on that. But let's say every time we have a meal, when we pray before the meal or take a moment, let's make it a holy little moment to remember the person of Jesus and his mission, his sacrifice, and his life. Remember his ultimate command. When he said, remember me, even if what he mostly always said was that my new command, this new covenant, is to love people the way he does. With all our flesh and all our blood. In the real world, just like he did. He didn't spiritualize it. He actually came, the ultimate act of empathy, became one of us. So what if we begin to do that? Not just bless your heart, or I'll pray for you, and hope that there's nothing in the real world that I have to do. But every time we eat and drink, remember I want to be on Jesus' mission of loving the unsavory, loving the people around me in the real world with my flesh and blood. And then we remember our distance from God without him and the amazing sacrifice and gift of Jesus becoming a real person, a sacrifice enough. He lived with us, died for us so we can have a better life because of it. So let's share that meal. And let's share that meal. Maybe as we get better at this, we can share that meal with somebody else and introduce them to Jesus. So after the Last Supper, the little transition, the part that's not in your notes. After the Last Supper is the crux of Christianity. We're going to skip over that today. Not really. We know the story of what happens, right? So he says, okay, let's go pray. They go to the Mount of Olives, they're going to go pray. Jesus is like, can you pray here? You guys hang out here. And then he takes the three of them and he goes, you pray here and I'm going to go up and pray here. And he's praying to the point of bleeding. And the guys are sleeping, praying to the point of sleeping. And he's trying, come on, guys. Come on, guys. And they fall back asleep. And finally he's like, I get it. You're people. I love you. And then the soldiers and the religious leaders and the betrayers show up. They take him. And then he's brought before religious leaders. He's brought before levels of political leaders who are influenced by religion. And they're self-serving and they condemn him, even though all of them know he's innocent. And then meanwhile, Peter, who just said, I'll never betray you, doesn't even wait till daybreak to betray him 3 times out loud to somebody else on the record. A religious mob calls for his death in spite of the fact of the love that they showed just a couple of days ago. They showed that they would rather have power than Jesus, and he's painfully tortured and he dies. And then there's 3 days of confusion and darkness and lostness. And then these women decide to fight through the confusion and do something about it, administer. And these three women, some of them pretty unsavory, go to the tomb, and it's empty. And they get to be the first evangelists. They meet Jesus, and they get to go tell everybody else, he did it. No, yeah, he did it. Yeah, remember what he said? He did it. It happened. And the guys are like, no, women. Pfft. All right. Then Jesus appears to the 10, minus Judas and Thomas, and then again to all of them, and then to a bunch of people. And then we get to breakfast, the last breakfast. We're going to go jump ahead to John, the end of John 21. And in verse 1 it says this, later Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. And this is how it happened. I like it when a story is like that. Let me tell you this. This is crazy. This happened. Several of the disciples were there, Simon, Peter, Thomas, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other. So a bunch of the disciples are there. That's the point. And Simon Peter is kind of the leader, says, I'm going to go fishing. And they're all like, we'll come too. They all said. So they went to the boat and they caught nothing all night. So back then, again, it's best to fish at night. And this is what they knew, right? So they go to fish all night. And at dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. And he called out, fellows, have you caught any fish? Nope, they reply. And then he said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll get some. And this time they did. I don't know if you remember the other story where they're like, that's stupid. It's the same water. And they did, and they could not haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple who Jesus loved, John, said to Peter, it's the Lord. And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped down for work, kind of a sign of honor, jumped into the water and headed to the shore. And the others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 100 yards from the shore. And when they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire, and some bread. Bring some of that fish you've just caught, Jesus said. So Simon Peter went back aboard and dragged the net to shore, and there were 153 large fish, yet the net hadn't torn. Little mini miracle again. How come, now come and have some breakfast, Jesus said. And none of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. And then Jesus served them bread and fish. This is the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. I love this story so much because of its humanity, because of its simplicity. It speaks to me. Peter's this fisherman, kind of uneducated fisherman, called by Jesus to be his follower. And he becomes kind of the leader, the brash. You know, we've heard about Peter if you've been in the church, kind of a brash, emotional, impulsive guy, speaks without thinking sometimes. But he's kind of the leader of the 12. He's the one who actually took the step out of the boat. He's called away from his boats to follow Jesus. He gets out of the boat on the water. Remember the story of Jesus walking on the water? That's like this common in our culture. Someone who walks on water thinks they're God. Well, Jesus is the one who started that whole trend, right? Because he walked across the water, and Peter was like, I'm going to go to... And Peter actually did it. Imagine Peter having a conscious memory of walking on water. When people are like, what do you think, you walk on water? Well, actually, yeah, a little bit. More than you, right? And then he panicked and like, I'm doing it, right? And he went down. He sinks, and Jesus saves him. And now he was at a loss after the crucifixion. He didn't know what to do because Jesus was not around in the way he had been before. And so at the end, he's like, you know what? Even though they saw Jesus and Jesus was gone, it wasn't the same. It was different. It was going to be different. He didn't know how to deal with it. He's like, well, I guess I'm going to go to what I know. I got to go do something. That was a cool time in my life, but I guess I'm going to go be a fisherman again. So he goes back to go fish, and James and John and a bunch of others follow him, and he does what he knows, and he fishes all night, which is normal, and they don't catch anything. And Jesus does the same thing at daybreak when it's worse to fish. It's best to fish at night. That's why they were fishing at night. And now it's the worst time to fish, and he's telling them to just throw it on the other side of the boat, which is the same water, and they do it. And by now I think they're kind of getting it. And they throw him over the other side, and they get this huge catch, and John, Captain Obvious, says, I think it's Jesus. Right? And Peter puts on his robe. He jumps in. He gets to Jesus first. He kind of leaves. This always bothers me. He leaves the other guys to struggle with all the fish. But I think maybe Peter learned the lesson from Mary and Martha. right? And he gets there first, and he gets a few minutes of one-on-one time with Jesus. Gotta love that. And he gets there, and Jesus already has breakfast cooking. I don't know how that works. I'm going to call this another mini miracle. We don't know if Jesus fished and actually caught fish, but I think he just wanted to have breakfast for them when they got in. So he made some fish and bread on a little fire. And Peter gets this little moment with him. And then Jesus says, hey, guess what? So they have this little talk. We don't know what they talk about. I think we probably have a guess. If you're Peter, how do you feel when finally you're alone with Jesus and you'd been so braggy about how you'd never leave him, and then you denied him, and here he is? I am so sorry. And Jesus is like, no, I got breakfast for you. And also, hey, you get to contribute to breakfast too. Go grab some of those fish that you just caught, that I miraculously went into your net. And he goes back and he drags him in. Why is it important? Why is this breakfast so important? There's a lot to it later. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I think this is biblical truth that now we see breakfast is the most important meal of the day. It is the most casual breakfast. It's the most casual meal, I mean. Nobody looks their best at breakfast, right? Especially camping. Especially after fishing. You're not smelling great. You're not looking great. You got bedhead. That's why breakfast is so easy to make. Crack an egg, pour sugar bombs into a bowl, pour milk over it, coffee. No one's at their best. In fact, we can even have breakfast in bed. We've made it so casual, we don't even get out of bed. And this is the last meal. This is really the last meal and the last life lesson that Jesus spends with his guys. How perfectly like Jesus. We're going to sit around a campfire. I made you some breakfast, and you even get to contribute. I'm going to give you part of this job. He proved he was really alive. One thing about Jesus eating right there proved it wasn't some spirit, it wasn't some hologram, it wasn't some imaginary thing. Spirits don't eat. He proved he's still flesh and blood. He proves he's God because they just caught 153 fish when they hadn't caught any. Plus, he apparently made some. It's casual, it's intimate, it's normal. It's everything about following Jesus mashed together, the divine and the human. Where the Last Supper was the end of an era meal, this is the start of an era meal. And Jesus says, I'm going to give you what you need. We're going to have some intimate time here. It's perfect empathy. Jesus lets them contribute. But it really ends in this next chunk. So there's amazing breakfast. He chooses this moment to give his last challenge. Point 3 is last instructions. And I just gave you the crux. I gave away the ending. I gave away the most important part, but we'll get there. But in the end, Jesus just says, follow me. But he does this other thing first, right? They're sitting at breakfast. And after breakfast, let me read this for the rest of you. I couldn't fit it on the sheet. But John 21:15 through 19 says, after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He's pointing to the other guys. Like, yes, Lord. And Peter replied, you know I love you. Then feed my lambs. Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said. You know I love you. Then take care of my sheep, Jesus said. A third time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time, and he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, then feed my sheep. And he goes on and talks a little bit about Peter trying to say, what about John? And Jesus kind of gives this cryptic answer about how John is going to die. And then he says, follow me. I love this, that Peter is facing Jesus. Imagine that embrace. Imagine that forgiveness. What a better way to communicate that Jesus forgives him, right, than giving him a little breakfast. And then he goes into the lesson. And I don't think it's an accident that it's recorded this way, that Peter denied Jesus 3 times and he gets to affirm Jesus 3 times. Right? Pretty cool. Now, there's a lot of study, and we could go into it, that John uses different words for love in each of these, and we'll do that another time. But I think what's most important is that Jesus is asking, do you really love me? And then he's like, the way you're going to show this is not because you're affirming and believing the right stuff or stating it louder than everybody else or really, really wanting to or believing it or feeling it. He's like, this is how you're going to show me that you love me, rather than your big statements and rather than you standing in front of a fire back at the crucifix, right, and telling the servant girl that you don't know me. The way you're going to prove you love me is caring for the people I love. Peter's declaration of love for Jesus at the last breakfast is so much more real than his declaration of love at the Last Supper. Now he's saying, I get it. Yeah, I'm going to care for your people. I'm going to love your people, the good ones and the unsavory ones. So there's that argument about others, and Jesus quietly boils it all down at breakfast and just says, follow me. Don't worry about everybody else. Follow me. Follow my heart. Follow my example. Peter was challenged to lead and to care and to love and to serve way beyond what he already knew, because he had tried it, what he could do on his own. Peter was given the opportunity to get past his past failure, to progress, to reject perfectionism and embrace forgiveness. And I ask you today, what failures have you had? What rejection have you faced that you need to get past your past and accept forgiveness in order to love people and follow Jesus? Follow his example, follow his command, and follow his mission. How can we love Jesus' people and show them true forgiveness? The result of that conversation over breakfast? What was the result of Peter's I love you at the Last Supper? It was his failure right on his face a few hours later. You know what the result of the last breakfast? Peter did it. Peter actually went out and did it. He gave one sermon and 3,000 people came to Jesus. He went on to lead the church. He was able to do it. Why? Because he was better? No, because he accepted and followed Jesus. He was following Jesus. Peter was given the opportunity to get past his failure, to progress, and to move forward. And he was successful. We're meeting today because Peter followed the message and took the charge from that last breakfast. Joe and Doug are going to come up and we're going to sing another song. But I want to remember, kind of to conclude this idea of eating and drinking, that the whole point of this whole series, besides the fact it's a cool thing to talk about, to remember the real person of Jesus. Jesus spent time eating and drinking with people. And when he was in that time, it was more than just a meal. It was more than just a way to connect. It was more than teaching, and it was a way to spend time with real people and their actual stuff. So we need to remember Jesus can provide for a big lunch. He loves and cares for us and loves to see us be successful, loves to see us have joy. We got to remember there's something always bigger than the meal that we're worried about, that following Jesus is more important. Always put Jesus at the center of what we're doing and love and care and eat with and share with the unsavory, including each other. We're going to worship in song here and then we'll wrap up. We're starting a new series. I've loved this series, but we're starting a new series. And this is one I'd say, I've been saving this one. So I would love for you to think about making sure you can be here. And maybe this might be one if you have some friends who are skeptical of church, to invite them. It's things we don't say in church, but probably should. Some things like, I don't know, or I don't feel good, or I'm sorry. And we're going to work on this a little bit. So that's the next series. I'm really excited about talking about it. So that's what we'll be talking about next. What I would love for you guys to do is go and have lunch. Go have lunch and make it a holy time. All right? Luke 22, 26 through 27 says this, "But among you it will be different. Those who are the greatest among you should take the lowest rank. The leader should be like the servant. Who is more important, the one who sits at the table or the one who serves? The one who sits at the table, but of course, but not here. For I am among you as one who serves. May we be a people who humbly invite everyone to join us at the table in order to introduce every person to Jesus. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next Sunday. Blessings.